He had not felt anything in 6 years. 6 years of silence. 6 years of standing at a window above the Hudson River, watching a city move without him, running an empire worth $800 million, and feeling absolutely nothing. Jang Hyun-woo, the most feared Korean mafia boss on the East Coast, had turned himself into a ghost. Expensive suit, cold eyes, tattoos climbing his neck like the last evidence that something alive had once lived inside that body. 30 people in his penthouse every Thursday night, and not one of them could touch him. Until she walked in. Layla Everett. A black woman from Harlem with a 1962 violin, a burgundy handbag, and a fee she desperately needed to pay her rent. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was a last-minute replacement. Nobody in that room of power and money gave her a single glance. And then she played. One note. Just one note of Bach. And something cracked inside a man who had spent 6 years making sure nothing ever could. He turned from the window for the first time in years. Not because of danger, not because of business, because of her. But what she didn't know, what neither of them could see coming, was that getting close to this man meant stepping into a world that had already decided she was a liability. Photographs were taken. Names were being written down. And the moment he finally felt something again was the exact moment he told her to leave and never come back. What happened next changed everything. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a member and help our channel. The city never really slept. Anyone who said it did had never stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of a Tribeca penthouse at 2 a.m, watching the Hudson carry its cold black water south, while the lights of New Jersey burned on the opposite bank, like something that couldn't decide whether it was dying or alive. Jang Hyun-woo had stood at those windows so many nights that he had stopped counting. He had stopped counting many things. Years, mostly. The years had a way of becoming indistinguishable when you trained yourself not to feel them passing. He was 38 years old, and he had the posture of a man who had decided at some point, he could no longer precisely locate, that the world did not deserve his softness. He was tall for a Korean man, broad through the shoulders, lean everywhere else, and he wore his body the way he wore his suits, like armor that happened to be beautiful. Tonight the suit was black, brioni, and the collar of his white shirt was open at the throat, the way it always was in private moments, revealing the base of the ink that climbed his neck. A dragon. Characters. The names of things he no longer said out loud. His penthouse occupied 2 full floors above Tribeca. The living room alone was larger than the first 3 apartments he had lived in when he arrived in the United States at 19, speaking English the way a man holds something fragile, carefully, aware that it might break. He had built everything in this apartment himself, in the sense that every object here had been chosen by him or approved by him, and every object carried the same quality. It was beautiful and it was cold, and it did not ask anything of anyone. There were 30 people in the room behind him. He could hear them, the specific frequency of wealth performing itself, the kind of conversation that sounds like information but contains none, the crystalline sound of expensive glass against expensive glass. These were his people in the only sense that mattered. They needed him, and he needed them to need him, because that was the architecture of the world he had built. No one in that room was his friend. He did not have friends. He had associates, he had obligations, and he had Taejun, his head of security, who was not a friend either, but who had been with him for 11 years, and therefore occupied a category Hyun-woo had never bothered to name. Taejun appeared at his elbow now, the way he always did, silently, without warning, because he understood that Hyunwoo did not want to hear footsteps approaching. He wanted people to simply be there or not be there. The in-between was the part he had no patience for. "The violinist arrived," Taejun said. His voice was low, flat, efficient. "She is a replacement. The original performer contacted us at 4 o'clock this afternoon with a medical situation. This one was referred by the agency. She came in her own transportation. No +1. The background check came back clean." Hyunwoo did not turn from the window. "What is her name?" "Layla Everett." He said nothing. The name passed through him without catching on anything. "Shall I have her shown to the performance area?" "Yes." Taejun withdrew. Hyunwoo stayed at the window another moment, the city doing what it always did. Glittering, indifferent, relentless. And then he turned and moved back into the room, and 30 people unconsciously adjusted their posture as he passed, the way living things do when something apex moves through their space. He took his glass from a side table, nodded once at a business associate from Seoul who had been trying to get 10 minutes alone with him for 3 days, and positioned himself near the far end of the room, near the piano that no one ever played, in the specific location where he could see the entire space without being at the center of it. He did not look at the woman setting up near the piano. He looked at the window again. He was good at looking at windows. Layla Everett had played in rooms like this before, which is to say she had played in rooms that looked like this, and she knew from experience that the people in rooms like this did not listen. They received. They absorbed music the way they absorbed everything else in their lives, as atmosphere, as proof that they had arrived somewhere worth arriving. She had made peace with this years ago, or she had told herself she had made peace with it, which was close enough on most nights to feel true. Tonight, walking across the marble floor with her violin case under one arm and her burgundy handbag pressed tight against her ribs, she was running 3 calculations simultaneously. The first was the route from the performance area to the nearest exit, because she always did this, because her mother had taught her that a woman should always know her exits. The second was money. The fee for tonight was 3 times her standard rate, which meant 2 months of breathing room, which meant she could stop checking her account balance before she went to sleep. The third calculation was the audition, which was 9 days away, and which occupied a corner of her mind at all times, the way a low-grade fever occupies the body. Always present, never quite comfortable. She found the designated area near the piano and began to unpack with the practiced economy of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The violin was a 1962 German workshop instrument, not a famous maker, not a museum piece, but a violin that had been played in so deeply that it had become something more than what it was made of, the wood saturated with decades of vibration. Her teacher had given it to her when she graduated from conservatory. "It has been waiting for the right pair of hands," he'd said, and she had rolled her eyes at the time, but that was before she understood what he meant. She rosined the bow. She adjusted the chin rest, which had shifted slightly in transit. She stood the way she always stood before she played, spine straight, shoulders down, weight balanced, and she looked out at the room. No one looked back. This was the moment she hated. Not because she needed their attention. She had never needed attention in the performative sense. She hated it because it reminded her of her father's voice, which was still inside her after all these years, living in the back of her throat like something that refused to dissolve. Music doesn't pay the rent, Layla. Music is what you do when you've given up on real things. He had not meant it cruelly. This was the worst part, actually. He had meant it as a practical observation, delivered with the blunt love of a man who had worked his entire life to make sure his daughter didn't have to work the way he had. He had not understood that he was building a ceiling over her head while he built the floor beneath her feet. She lifted the violin to her shoulder. She closed her eyes. She heard his voice. And then she heard her mother's voice instead, which was quieter and did not use words. It was just the sound of music coming through a bedroom wall on a Sunday morning. The sound of Bach filling a small apartment in Harlem like light filling a room when the curtains are opened. The sound of something being loved for its own sake and no other reason. Layla played the first note of the chaconne. The room did not go quiet immediately. These things never happened immediately. Silence of the real kind takes a moment to arrive, because it has to travel against the current of all the noise that was already in motion. But it arrived. It arrived the way certain things arrive. Not announced, but suddenly, completely present. Hyunwoo turned his head. He did this before he had decided to do it. His body responded to the sound before his mind had processed what the sound was, which was itself remarkable, because his mind was almost always faster than his body. He had trained it to be. He had trained himself to process information before he reacted to it, to make sure that every movement he made was a choice. The moment the first note entered the room, that system failed. He turned. She was not looking at the room. She was not performing for the room. Her eyes were closed, her chin resting against the instrument with the ease of a person resting against something beloved. And she was playing the way certain people pray. Not for an audience, not for approval, but because the alternative was a silence she could not survive. He stood very still. He had not stood very still for pleasure in 6 years. He had stood still many times in those 6 years, for strategy, for patience, for the particular stillness required to make other people nervous. But not for this. Not for the feeling that was moving through him now, which was not a feeling he had a current name for, because he had retired all the names for feelings of this kind when he lost the only person who had made him believe they were worth having. But there it was. Small, painful, undeniable, like a single crack in a wall that had taken years to build. The chaconne lasted 14 minutes. Hyunwoo did not move for any of them. This was not something anyone in the room would have noticed. He was not a man who moved much under ordinary circumstances, and to the associates and diplomats and carefully positioned allies who filled his penthouse, he looked the same as he always looked. Controlled, remote, present in the way that a locked door is present. But Taejun noticed. Taejun, who had spent 11 years learning the precise grammar of Hyunwoo's stillness, understood immediately that something in the room was different, and he spent the 14 minutes that the woman played scanning the space for threats, finding none, and arriving at the unsettling conclusion that whatever had changed was coming from inside the man he was paid to protect. The last note ended. The room held the silence for exactly 3 seconds. The involuntary, uncoordinated silence of people who had been caught off guard by something genuine. And then the polite applause began, and the conversations restarted, and the room remembered what it was and went back to being it. Layla opened her eyes. She lowered the bow. She did not look around the room for a reaction, she never did, and she began the small ritual of the aftermath. Wiping the rosin dust from the strings with a cloth, loosening the bow hair, checking the fine tuners with the automatic attention of someone performing a task so familiar it required no conscious thought. She was thinking about the audition. She was always thinking about the audition when she played the chaconne, because the chaconne was the piece she had chosen for it, which meant every performance of it was also a rehearsal, a measurement, a private conversation between herself and the question of whether she was ready. She did not hear him approach. Most people would have. He was a large man, and marble floors are unforgiving to footsteps. But Hyunwoo had developed over years of professional necessity a way of moving through spaces that was less walking and more arriving. As though he displaced no air, cast no shadow, simply appeared in proximity to wherever he intended to be. You played it like you were crying. His voice was low, not soft. There was a difference, and this was not soft. It was the voice of a man who had removed all the excess from his speech, the way a surgeon removes what doesn't belong, leaving only what was necessary. The accent was there, Korean beneath the English, present but controlled, the way something submerged is still visible through clear water. Layla turned. She looked at him the way she looked at everything she needed to quickly understand. Directly, without apology, her honey-brown eyes moving across his face with the calm efficiency of a woman who had learned early that looking away was its own kind of vulnerability. She saw the tattoos climbing his neck. She saw the watch. She saw the quality of the suit and the specific blankness of his expression. Not the blankness of stupidity, which she knew how to recognize, but the blankness of someone who had chosen it deliberately. The way you choose a coat for weather you know is coming. She also saw, beneath all of it, something else. Something she could not immediately name, but that her body responded to before her mind caught up. A quality in his eyes that reminded her of the apartments she had played in, where the furniture was expensive and the rooms were empty, and something was missing that all the money in the world had not been able to replace. Because I was, she said. He held her gaze. He had not expected the answer, not the content of it, and not the directness. He was accustomed to people softening things for him, rounding the edges, performing a version of themselves that they calculated he would prefer. This woman had done none of that. She had looked straight at him and told him the truth as though it were the only reasonable thing to do. Why? He asked. The word came out before he decided to say it. This also was unusual. This also went into Taejun's private record of the evening as something to consider later. Layla tilted her head slightly. Not defensiveness, consideration. She was deciding how much truth this stranger in the expensive suit deserved, and she was making the calculation openly, without hiding that she was making it, which was itself a kind of honesty. My mother died last year, she said. She loved Bach, the chaconne specifically. She used to play it on Sunday mornings, and I would lie in my bedroom and listen through the wall. And at some point, the music and the feeling of being safe became the same thing for me. She paused. When I play it now, I still feel her in it. So, yes, I'm crying. Just not with my face. Silence. Jang Hyunwoo stood in the middle of his own penthouse, surrounded by 30 people who needed things from him, and he did not know what to say. He, who had sat across tables from dangerous men in 3 countries and never once lost the thread of the conversation, who could negotiate in 2 languages simultaneously and read a room the way a navigator reads weather. He stood in front of a woman with rosin dust on her fingers and a burgundy handbag, and he had no words. What he had, instead, was a sensation in his chest that he had last felt 6 years ago and had spent every subsequent day constructing architecture to prevent. A kind of opening. A kind of terrible, unwelcome warmth. I want you to come back, he said. Next week. Same time. Layla looked at him for a moment. You want to hire me again? Yes. Why? Now it was his turn to consider. And to his own private astonishment, he told her the truth. Not all of it, not even most of it, but the edge of it, which was more than he had told anyone in years. because the room needed it. She came back the following week. She told herself it was the money, which was not untrue. The fee appeared in her account the morning after the first performance, 3 times her standard rate, transferred with the kind of quiet efficiency that suggested this was how this man operated in all things. Completely, without ceremony, leaving no loose ends. She deposited it and paid 2 months of rent in one movement, and for 48 hours felt the specific lightness of someone who has temporarily outrun a fear that has been chasing them for a long time. She came back, and the room was smaller. Not the penthouse, that was the same. All glass and marble, and the particular temperature of spaces that have never been warm. But the configuration of the evening was different. There were fewer people, 8 or 10 rather than 30, and they were engaged in conversations that did not require a performance from anyone, which meant the music would be for no one in particular, which was the way Layla always preferred it. She sat up near the piano again. He was standing at the window again. She began to understand that this was his position, his chosen station. The way certain people have a chair that is theirs, a corner that belongs to them, a location in the room from which they observe the world without participating in it. He stood at the window with his drink and his stillness and his tattoos and his watch, and he watched the Hudson, and everyone else in the room arranged themselves in relation to his presence the way planets arrange themselves in relation to gravity. She played for an hour. He did not move from the window. But this time, when she finished, he was already closer than she remembered him being when she started. She had not seen him cross the room, but there he was, 8 feet away instead of 30, the city dark and enormous behind him, his glass empty. "The second piece," he said. "What was it?" "Izai, Sonata No. 2. She loosened her bow. "It's a piece about obsession, about a theme that follows you whether you want it to or not." Something moved across his face. Not emotion exactly. Emotion was too large a word for what she saw. It was more like the distant echo of emotion, the way you see the shape of something underwater before it surfaces. "Play it again," he said. She did. The weeks arranged themselves into a pattern that neither of them named, because naming it would have required acknowledging that a pattern existed, and neither of them was ready for that. She came on Thursday evenings. The rooms grew quieter each week, fewer guests, shorter evenings, until by the 4th week, she arrived to find only Taejun at the entrance and a penthouse occupied exclusively by the man who lived there. "You sent everyone home," she said. It was not an accusation. "The meeting ended early." His voice gave nothing away. She looked at him for a beat. "Hyun-woo." He stilled at the sound of his name. She had not used it before. No one used it without the honorific or the title or the careful professional distance that everyone who knew him maintained like a border. "Play something you chose," he said. "Not a request. Yours." She set down her bag. She took out the violin. She played Ravel, the Zigan, which is a piece that starts like a conversation a single person is having with themselves in an empty room, intimate and slightly unhinged, and then explodes into something that demands to be heard. He sat down. In 6 years, Jung Hyun-woo had not sat in his own living room and simply listened to something. He had occupied the room. He had used the room. He had stood in it and thought in it and conducted business in it, and once, in the first year after his wife died, he had sat down in it in the middle of the night and stayed there until morning without sleeping, just existing in the dark while the city moved outside. But he had not sat down and listened. He listened now. And Layla played, and did not look at him, and felt, against every reasonable instinct she possessed, that something in the room had shifted in a direction she had not planned for and could not entirely bring herself to stop. It was Taejun who saw it first. This was not surprising. Taejun's entire professional existence was built on seeing things before they became problems, which meant he had developed over 11 years a sensitivity to change in Hyunwoo's behavior that bordered on the clinical. He cataloged deviations the way a doctor catalogs symptoms, not with alarm, not yet, but with the careful attention of someone who understood that small things, ignored long enough, become large things. The deviations had begun on the night of the first performance and had been accumulating since. Hyunwoo had started sleeping past 6 in the morning. This alone would have been unremarkable in any other man, but Hyunwoo had not slept past 6 in the morning in 6 years. He rose before dawn with the automated precision of someone whose body had decided that sleep was a transaction to be completed as efficiently as possible and abandoned the moment it was done. Now, twice in 1 week, Taejun had walked past the master bedroom at 7 and heard nothing. No movement, no footsteps, no the particular sound of a man already awake and already somewhere inside whatever the day required of him. He was also eating dinner. This sounds like an absurdly small thing, and Taejun was aware of how absurdly small it sounded. But the truth was that for years, Hyunwoo had eaten with the enthusiasm of a man fueling a machine. Sufficient, joyless, completed. He did not linger over meals. He did not express preferences. He ate what was prepared and moved on. And if the food was extraordinary or mediocre, he registered neither. But on a Tuesday evening, 4 days after the 5th Thursday session with Layla Everett, Taejun walked into the kitchen to confirm a security schedule and found Hyunwoo standing at the counter eating cold Korean rice with fermented cabbage that he had retrieved from the refrigerator himself. Slowly, unhurried, and there was something about the way he was eating it, the small, private quality of a person actually tasting something, that stopped Taejun in the doorway. Hyunwoo looked up. He did not explain himself. He did not have to. This was still his house, and Taejun's surprise was not a question that required answering. But Taejun went back to his office and wrote 3 words in the private log he kept on a phone that was not connected to any network. Something is changing. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Thursday in November, 6 weeks into the pattern, when the city outside had gone the particular gray of New York in the approach to winter. Not cold enough yet to be beautiful, just cold enough to be relentless. Layla arrived at 7, as always. She unpacked, as always. But that evening, before she lifted the violin, she sat down on the piano bench, not to play, just to sit, and looked at him where he stood at the window, and she said something she had been not saying for 3 weeks. "You only ever ask for the sad ones." He turned from the window. He looked at her. "The pieces," she continued. "Every time you make a request, and you've started making requests, which I notice, it's always something with weight. Izai, the chacon. Last week you asked for the barber. These are not party pieces, Hyunwoo. These are pieces people play when they need to put something down that they've been carrying." He said nothing. He crossed the room and sat in the chair he had been sitting in for the past several weeks. The one diagonal from where she played. The one that she had begun, privately, to think of as his listening chair, which was a thought she recognized as dangerous and had not yet succeeded in stopping herself from having. "The others are lies," he said. It was the same answer he had given weeks before, but it landed differently now. Not as a closed door, but as an opening. as though he was handing her the beginning of an explanation and waiting to see if she would take it. She took it. "Who did you lose?" she asked. The silence that followed was the longest silence they had ever shared, and they had shared many. This one had a different texture. Not the comfortable silence of two people who had grown accustomed to each other's presence, but the taut, loaded silence of something being decided. "My wife," he said. 6 years ago. Layla held the information carefully. The way you hold something that you understand is fragile. "What was her name?" He looked at her for a moment, and she watched something move across his face. Pain, yes, but beneath the pain, something else. Something that looked almost like relief. Like a man who has been holding his breath for a very long time and has just been given permission to exhale. "Suyeon," he said. It was the first time he had said her name out loud in 4 years. After that evening, something between them shifted. Not dramatically, not with announcement, but the way river water shifts direction around a new obstacle. Gradually, inevitably, finding the new path with the patient logic of water that has no choice but to move. They began to talk before she played and after she played, and sometimes in the middle of playing, when she would lower the violin and he would ask something and she would answer, and the conversation would sit between them for a while before she lifted the bow again. She told him about Harlem, about the apartment with the thin walls through which she had learned Bach, about the conservatory scholarship she had won at 16 and her father's face when she told him, proud and afraid in equal measure, the particular expression of a man who loves his child and cannot stop seeing every door she walks through as a potential trap. About the 9 years since graduation spent playing in hotels and private events, and once, memorably, on a rooftop in Brooklyn for a party where no one listened and the skyline was extraordinary, and she had decided afterward that the skyline had been the point, and she had simply been part of the weather. He listened to all of it with the focused, total attention of someone who has been starving for something they had forgotten they needed. In return, slowly, carefully, in pieces, he told her things he did not tell people. Not about the business, never about the business, but about the man inside the business, which was a person almost no one had ever been given access to. He told her about arriving in New York at 19 with 2 suitcases and an uncle who owed a debt to the wrong people, and how the debt had become his inheritance. He told her about the years of building, not with pride, not with the performance of power, but with the flat honesty of a man describing a road he walked that had no other exits. He told her about Suyeon, how she had been the only person who had ever made him feel that the life he had built was not the only life available to him. How she had died in a car accident on a Tuesday in March 6 years ago, and how he had stood in a hospital corridor in Seoul and felt the world reduce itself to a single frequency, silence, from which he had never entirely returned. "You built everything after that," Layla said one evening. She wasn't asking. "There was nothing else to do with the time," he said. She looked at him. "That's not true. You chose to do nothing else with the time." He could have been cold about it. 6 months ago, he would have been cold about it. He would have recognized the observation as accurate and felt nothing in particular about its accuracy and moved the conversation somewhere safer. Instead, he sat with it. He let it land. And then he said quietly, "Yes." It was Tae-jun who found the photographs. A journalist, freelance, connected to 3 different publications, with a history of stories about organized crime infrastructure in the Northeast, had been making inquiries for 11 days. Tae-jun had known about him for 9 of those days, and had been monitoring the situation with the methodical calm of someone who had handled situations like this before. What changed on a Wednesday morning in late November was that the journalist had obtained photographs. Not of anything incriminating, the man was not that good, but of Layla. Entering the building, leaving, entering again. 6 photographs across 6 weeks, her face clearly visible, her burgundy handbag identifiable in 3 of them. Taejun brought this to Hyunwoo at 8 in the morning and watched his employer go through the photographs with an expression that was, by Hyunwoo's standards, the equivalent of open devastation. "She is not connected to anything," Hyunwoo said. His voice was even. His hands were not. "She doesn't need to be connected to anything to be damaged by association," Taejun said, carefully. Hyunwoo set the photographs down on the table, face down. He looked out the window. He looked at the Hudson. "Handled the journalist through the legal team," he said. "Nothing else." "And the woman?" Hyunwoo was quiet for a long time. "I'll handle that myself," he said. She arrived on Thursday as always, violin case in hand, the gold clip in her hair catching the light in the elevator. And she was smiling slightly because 3 days ago she had received confirmation that her audition date at the Philharmonic had been moved forward. A cancellation had opened a slot, and the audition was now 5 days away, and she was ready. She could feel that she was ready in the way you feel it when preparation and belief have finally arrived at the same place at the same time. The door opened. Hyunwoo was standing in the center of the room. Not at the window, not in his chair. In the center. And he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, which was the expression of a man who has made a decision he knows is wrong, and has made it anyway because he believes it is the only decision that does not put something he values in danger. "You need to stop coming here," he said. She did not move from the doorway. The violin case was still in her hand. The gold clip was still in her hair. The city was still happening 40 floors below them, indifferent and enormous, the way it always was. The way it would continue to be, regardless of what happened in this room in the next few minutes. Layla stood in the threshold of Jang Hyunwoo's penthouse and looked at him standing in the center of it. Not at the window. Not in his chair. Not in any of the positions she had learned to read over 6 weeks of Thursday evenings. And she understood, with the particular clarity that arrives when something you had been quietly hoping for suddenly shows its underside, that this was not a conversation she had been prepared for. "Say that again," she said. "You need to stop coming here." His voice was the same. Flat, controlled, stripped of everything that could be used against him. The mask was fully back. She could see the seams of it now, which she could not have seen 6 weeks ago. But she could see them now because she knew what was underneath. Why? It was not a question. She said it the way you say something when you already know the answer is going to be inadequate, and you want the other person to hear how inadequate it is before they even say it. "It isn't safe," he said. Layla set the violin case down on the floor beside the door. She set it down slowly, deliberately, with the care of someone putting something valuable in a place she could retrieve it quickly. And then she straightened and looked at him across the length of the room, and felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but contained elements of both. The specific feeling of recognizing a pattern you had promised yourself you were done with. "It isn't safe," she repeated. Her voice was quiet, quieter than his. The quiet of a woman who has learned that volume is not the same as power. "That's what you're giving me. There is a journalist. He has photographs of you entering this building. If his article runs with your name or your face, it connects you to things you have no connection to. And that connection will follow you in ways that cannot be undone. You have an audition in 5 days. You have a career that is about to begin. I will not be the reason it doesn't." She listened to all of it. She let him finish. And then she said, "You're doing what my father did." He held her gaze. He said nothing. "My father sent me away from things he decided were dangerous for me, without asking me whether I wanted to be protected. He made the decision and presented it as love, and expected me to be grateful." Her voice did not shake. She had never been a woman whose voice shook when she was angry. It went quieter instead, each word more precise, a scalpel rather than a hammer. "You are standing in the middle of your empty penthouse, telling me to leave and calling it protection. And you haven't once asked me what I want. What you want is not the point. It is exactly the point." She took 3 steps into the room. Not toward him, just into the room, claiming space, refusing the doorway. "You don't get to decide what I can handle, Hyunwoo. You don't get to look at my life and determine that I need to be kept away from the difficult parts of yours. I play music about loss and obsession and grief for a living. I have been sitting in this room, listening to you tell me things you haven't told anyone in 6 years, and I have not looked away from any of it. Do not stand there and tell me I need to be protected from you." The silence that followed was the most alive silence he had ever stood inside. Taejun, positioned in the hallway with the door to the main stairwell cracked precisely 2 inches. Not eavesdropping. Never eavesdropping. Simply being where he needed to be. Wrote nothing in his private log. He just listened. And he felt, for the first time in 11 years of working for this man, something that he could only describe as hope. Though he was not a man who used that word often or lightly. Hyunwoo looked at Layla Everett standing in the center of his living room, 3 steps inside the threshold, violin case on the floor behind her. And he felt the crack in the wall. The one that had started the night she played the first note of the chaconne. The one that had been spreading quietly through everything he had built in 6 years of deliberate emotional architecture. Give way. Not collapse, not shatter, just give way. The way a held breath gives way. The way winter gives way. Not with drama, but with the slow, undeniable arrival of something warmer. "I know," he said. 2 words. But the mask was gone. He called his lawyer that same night. The legal team moved on the journalist within 48 hours. Not with threats, not with the kind of pressure that leaves marks, but with the clean, precise application of legitimate leverage that a man with $800 million and 3 corporate attorneys on retainer can deploy when he chooses to operate within the law. The photographs were not publishable without releases. The story, as constructed, had 2 factual errors significant enough to constitute liability. The journalist, presented with this information by a woman in a very good suit in a very quiet conference room, elected to redirect his attention elsewhere. Layla did not know any of this until it was done. She had left the penthouse on Thursday without playing. She had taken her violin case and her burgundy handbag and walked out and pressed the elevator button and ridden down 40 floors with her eyes closed and her hand pressed flat against the cold metal wall of the elevator, steadying herself. She had gone home to Harlem and sat at her kitchen table and practiced the chaconne for 2 hours. Not because she needed to practice it, but because she needed to be inside something true. And that was the truest thing she knew. She practiced every day for the 4 days before the audition. The audition was at Lincoln Center on a Tuesday morning in December, in one of the smaller rehearsal rooms on the 3rd floor, a room with good acoustics and fluorescent lighting, and 4 judges seated behind a table with water glasses and manila folders, and the particular expressions of people who have heard many things and remain open to being surprised, but do not expect to be. Layla was the 12th candidate. She walked in, she sat up, she stood the way she always stood, spine, shoulders, weight. And she looked at the 4 faces behind the table and heard in the silence before she began the full chorus of voices that lived inside her. Her father. Music doesn't pay the rent. Her teacher. It has been waiting for the right pair of hands. Her mother, wordless. Just the sound of Bach through a wall on a Sunday morning. And then, underneath all of them, quieter than all of them, a voice that was low and flat and carried the ghost of a Korean accent and had asked her once, standing at a window above the Hudson, "Why did you play it like you were crying?" She did not play the audition piece she had spent 4 months preparing. She played the chaconne. The judges stopped writing at the 40-second mark. She knew because she heard the pens go still, and in the particular acoustics of that room, the silence of 4 pens is audible to someone who has trained her ears to hear everything. She did not open her eyes. She stayed inside the music, inside her mother, inside the Sunday mornings, inside everything that had brought her to this room and this moment and this version of herself. The version that had sat in a penthouse with a man made of walls and watched the walls come down, and had not looked away, and had been changed by the not looking away in ways she was still learning the shape of. The last note faded. 3 seconds of silence. Then one of the judges, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the expression of someone who has just remembered why she chose this profession, set down her folder and said, "Thank you, Ms. Everett. We'll be in touch." The way she said it was not the way they said it to the others. Layla knew. She walked out into the corridor with her violin under her arm and her handbag on her shoulder, and she sat down on a bench against the wall of the Lincoln Center hallway and looked at the ceiling and breathed. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She had ignored it before, twice, but this time her hand moved to answer it before her mind decided to. I took care of the journalist. His voice, low, flat, and carrying something underneath it now that had not been there in the beginning. Something open. Something that had not been there before the Thursday she refused to leave. Legally, my attorney handled it. There is nothing attached to your name. She sat on the bench in the Lincoln Center hallway and looked at the ceiling. Why did you do that? She asked, though she already knew. The pause that followed was the pause of a man choosing truth over composure, which was the bravest thing she had ever watched anyone do. And she had watched it before. She had watched it in the music, in the moments when musicians stopped performing and started revealing. And she recognized it now in the silence of a phone line between Tribeca and the Upper West Side. Because you are the only thing in 6 years that has not been silence, he said. They met that evening. Not at the penthouse. He had suggested a restaurant in Queens, a small Korean place with formica tables and no dress code, and a menu that did not accommodate people who needed to be seen eating somewhere impressive. She arrived to find him already there, seated in a booth near the back, and he was wearing dark trousers and a simple shirt with the collar open and the tattoos on his neck visible without the architecture of the suit. And he looked, she thought, sitting down across from him, like a man who had stopped pretending to be only one thing. She was wearing the black dress. Her hair was loose. No gold clip, just the hair itself, full and natural and unheld, the way she wore it when she was not performing for anyone. She told him she had been accepted before the dessert arrived. She knew before the call came. She had known in the hallway. But the call came while they were eating, and she looked at the screen, and then looked at him, and then answered it. And when she hung up, she set the phone face down on the formica table and her eyes filled, not with sadness, but with the overwhelming, body-wide relief of something you have been carrying for so long that when you finally set it down, you feel the absence of the weight more than you feel the freedom. He did not say congratulations immediately. He looked at her for a moment first. Really looked. The way he had been learning to look since the night the Shakhan cracked him open. And then he said it, quietly. And then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. It was a small smile. The smile of a man who had forgotten he owned one. But it was real, and it reached his eyes, and Layla looked at it and felt something settle inside her that had been unsettled for a very long time. They stayed at the Formica table for 3 hours. They talked about his wife and her mother, and the way grief reshapes a person without asking permission, and about New York in December, and about a piece by Arvo Part that she wanted him to hear, and about the restaurant in Seoul that he had not been back to since Suyeon died, and that he thought, for the first time, he might want to go back to. They talked about her father, who she was going to call tomorrow with news she had been waiting years to deliver. They talked about small things that were not small at all. The way all the most important conversations always hide themselves inside the ordinary. When they left, the street outside was cold, and the lights were on, and the city was doing what the city did, which was everything simultaneously and without apology. He extended his hand, not as an escort, not as protection, not as any of the things his hands had been used for in the years of building the life he had built. Just as presence. Just as a man standing on a street in Queens in December, next to a woman holding a violin case, offering the one thing he had spent 6 years refusing to offer anyone. She looked at his hand. She looked at him. And she took it. The city moved around them the way cities do. Enormous, indifferent, relentless. And neither of them spoke because there was nothing left to say that the moment was not already saying. Somewhere to the north, in a rehearsal room at Lincoln Center, a chair was waiting for her. Somewhere inside him, in the space where 6 years of silence had lived, something was breathing again. Tentatively, carefully. The way a thing breathes when it has been still for a long time and is only now remembering how. He had lived like a ghost. And a woman with a violin and a burgundy handbag and the courage to stay when he told her to go had played a single note into the dark of him. And the dark had answered. Not with noise, not with drama, just with warmth, just with presence, just with the quiet, radical proof that some walls, built high enough and long enough, still have a crack running through them, and that all it takes sometimes is the right frequency to find it. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been in a room where no one saw you, truly saw you, until one honest moment changed everything? Have you ever watched someone push you away, not because they didn't care, but because caring terrified them more than anything they had ever faced? And if you have ever felt that the wall someone built around themselves was never really meant to keep you out, but to keep their own pain in, tell us. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about redemption, love that finds the unexpected, and the quiet courage it takes to stay when someone tells you to go, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.